Did you know adoptees have 43% more chance of being addicts than non-adoptees? That's right. That was a part of my story. And because we don't know anything about my heritage and family history, it wasn't something we ever thought about. And it's something that prevented me from getting sober for a very long time. I didn't begin my recovery journey until I was in my 30s. For the longest time, I knew that there were challenges that I faced from being adopted. I had a semblance of how they were manifesting, but not entirely. But somehow I managed to overlook that the alcoholism in my life was an issue. And that had a lot to do with the fact that I created a life around my addiction. Withdrew from college after my first year, and then I became a bartender, put myself through college later. I left my adoptive family. A really common characteristic of addiction are a lot of failed relationships, whether they be with family, whether they be romantic, whether they be with friendships. I just chose to go and do my own thing. I had reasons behind certain things. I think there's some instances where severing ties with your family is necessary if there are some unhealthy connections and behaviors and things like that going on. For the next 20 years, I barely had a relationship with my family. I considered myself to be doing fine. I paid my bills. I held down a job. But what I didn't realize was that I was surrounding myself with people that were living similar lifestyles. And so it made it very easy to rationalize my behavior as an alcoholic. I mean, towards the last couple of years, I was drinking a bottle of vodka a day, but because I was showing up to work, paying my bills, I actually was almost never single the entire time I was in my alcoholism, which lasted until like my late 30s. And so, I thought things were going all right. It wasn't until I actually had a few attempts at sobriety. And after I had about 2 years, I relapsed. When I remember telling myself as I quote unquote, chose to drink again, I thought I was handling the relapse responsibly, telling people, hey, I don't think I have a problem with alcohol. And at that point, because I had some sobriety, my life has started to begin to get better. I was living in nicer places. I stopped bartending for a bit, but then I went back to it and managed to do it sober for a year, and then it led me back to drinking again. And I told myself, well, I don't need to stay sober. My life's, gotten better. I think if I just go to therapy for my adoption issues, I'll be fine. And at the time, I had gone through a spiritual transformation. I became Buddhist. I was chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. My Buddha mom, who I'm still friends with today, was wonderful, but didn't necessarily understand addiction. And she told me, if you just chant, you'll be fine. You don't need to go to your recovery meetings. And so I had all, people around me saying these things. I was finding reasons. I can't blame these people, but there was something going on with my thinking, and that is the disease of addiction. It starts in our thinking about things to rationalize myself not being sober anymore. So I actually told myself, and I met people in recovery, this was like how you surround yourself with like-minded people, how I got back into bartending, and I started working for a Michelin star restaurant. I was told, I'll introduce you to another sober sommelier. And I'm like, okay. How the heck can you be someone who's sober and doesn't drink, but you're doing wine tastings as a sommelier? But in my mind, I thought, wow, this really reinforces my argument behind being able to stay sober and be a bartender. So that happened in my first recovery. It eventually led me back to drinking. And for me, it wasn't so much the fantasy or the feeling of drinking that drew me back. It was actually something that I didn't realize I had so much control over me. It was like I wanted to make money, and I wasn't making very much money doing these jobs without a college degree where I wasn't bartending. And I actually even got a job as a director of marketing for this like health startup in Beverly Hills. So, I mean, I was capable. People, they saw where I went to college. I interviewed well. But I think I held on to this belief because I had been doing the same thing for so long that I didn't have a lot of options. There was a lot of fear that also kept bringing me back. You're kind of more comfortable in what you've known. So for me, what it looked like for towards the end of my drinking before I got sober and got scholarship to go to rehab was I no longer wanted to go to work. I used to change jobs whenever I felt like it. And the irony was, like, I was living in Los Angeles and they just reward you for being a diva. I literally walked out of one job that I was training for and like gave some attitude about what I didn't like about it. And they called me back up asking me if I would come back and work. I was like, are you kidding me? And like another thing that I found interesting too is that I think I felt like being in the relationships I was in when I was in my addiction was a lot easier than the relationships that I experienced in sobriety at first, because I just didn't care about other people. I didn't realize that it's such a self-centered disease. You know, you're so oblivious of other things that on one hand, yeah, it can make certain aspects of life easier, but on the other hand, you're not really present in your own life. And so I lived a very limited experience. So when I got sober, through the grace of God and a friend who helped me get a scholarship with the Music Cares Foundation, I had nothing, no money, no job. But I had an apartment. My family, they didn't understand addiction. I went to a facility that was no bells and whistles, let me tell you, versus I had been to rehab before, was a very cushy kind of place. Let me tell you, getting scared going to the second one, you know, that actually worked in my benefit because it's not supposed to be a resort when you get sober. You know, I had a spiritual practice. I told you I found Buddhism at the time, and that really carried me. I think that really helped me a lot. And it wasn't foreign to me getting sober. I'd done it before, but I also had a greater appreciation because after I relapsed, I realized, shit, you have a problem. You can't control your drinking. I was out for a year. It eventually led me back to make poor decisions and then just really have little will to want to do anything. And I kind of just didn't really even care about living anymore. I'm going to be very honest. It gets that empty and destitute. I was immensely humbled by the experience. The first time around, it scared me, but it didn't get me to the place of really accepting that I had a problem with it. When I came back to Los Angeles, I chose myself to do all the things that were recommended that I didn't do the first time I got sober. But now I was trying to figure out ways on how was I going to afford a sober living. That's why I was at least living off my unemployment. And I'd been self-sufficient since I left my family in 19, but every once in a while there'd be something that comes up where, you know, it would be like, we need to help her. And so, thankfully, I went to the sober living that was recommended. I definitely advise you trying to get references from people. And same sober living later asked me to work there. So I did in early recovery. I was a assistant sober living manager where I lived and worked in recovery. And it allowed me to have a place to stay. It included my rent, and then I got paid, minimum wage. Didn't have a car. Like most people that are restarting their lives, usually as alcoholics and addicts, I had a license that was suspended, mine because of too many parking tickets. I managed not to get any DUIs, but that doesn't mean I didn't deserve them. I just managed to escape the law. So I had no car, no job, no money except for unemployment, living in a women's sober living. So what do? You focus on getting sober. That's what you do. You keep life simple. You do things where you have to practice contrary action because If I was left up to make the decisions myself at that stage, I would have made all the wrong decisions, thinking I can do everything on my own. So I had to learn to accept help. I had to learn how to be vulnerable, learn to be a part of a community. I'm a former foster youth and adoptee who's highly guarded, who had other things happen in my life that really made me distrust people. I somehow, by the grace of God, was able to do all these things, but it didn't happen overnight. You know, you don't change a lifetime of patterns overnight. One of the things I did was follow the example of the people that seemed to have what I wanted, kept myself open, took suggestions, stayed in touch with people to help keep me accountable. Interestingly, though, even though I was scholarship by this music foundation, I was so self-conscious and insecure. I used to put on this facade that I was super confident when I was in my alcoholism, but it was all a facade. I was in disbelief. I'm like, how did this foundation help me? They must have made a mistake. I had such huge imposter syndrome, and I'd actually been working at a record label before this. And it wasn't until after my first year of sobriety that I finally connected with them through meeting someone else who was going to the recovery meeting who hadn't even been helped by the foundation. I made it there. I started going weekly. And before this, I had really felt comfortable in just all women's settings for my recovery. I don't know, but I had a lot of anger towards men, and I found them very irritating. I can't say some of that sentiment has changed. So I just didn't want that distraction. Actually, it was more for their own safety than my own, because I know how to take care of myself and kind of knock someone out. I say that because the music community is like predominantly men, and the recovery community is predominantly men. And you have a disproportionate number of men getting sober versus women because of the challenges a lot of women have, especially if they have families. They're a much more kind of vulnerable population in that regard, where they will put their kids before their own well-being, not realizing that taking care of their sobriety first makes them a more fit parent. And it's a hard one. It's a really hard one I've watched because I work for the Women's Foundation. So I have a background in working in treatment, because after the sober living, I went on to work for an intervention company as a sober companion. It's not just my lived experience, it's also my professional experience. And I'll tell you, some of my most extreme clients, they were also adoptees. I dealt with people with the most extreme and acute mental health issues. It is worthy to note that adoptees have 43% of higher rate of addiction than non-adoptees. We also have 4 times the rate of unaliving ourselves. Trauma from adoption is a very real thing, and it's something people don't want to talk about because there's such a cognitive dissonance conditioned with the adoption narrative, this whole idea that you should be grateful you're adopted. I actually even had another adoptee on my YouTube page lash out for me for wanting to search for my birth mom, telling me that I was ungrateful and that I should, consider myself lucky to be adopted. First of all, she doesn't know my story at all. A lot of adoptive children are adopted into really abusive families as well. I don't know how many people I talk to who have had that experience. So to tell someone to edit their experience because it makes someone else uncomfortable, basically the definition of a cognitive dissonance is having 2 conflicting beliefs simultaneously. So one, you're told you have to be grateful, but the other, you could be being abused by your adoptive family. Or in a lot of transracial adoptees experience, I can say for myself, racial gaslighting, because my white adoptive family couldn't identify with the issues that I was going through. So it was easier for them to just say to me, oh, but everybody was so loving anytime I brought up racism. And these are things that parents who are adopting children need to really be educated about. Regardless of whether you believe adoption is bad or good and should happen or not happen, it's still going to happen. I hate to break it to you. It's important to at least illuminate some of the things that can come up. And I can do that because I'm an adoptee. And I've also worked in the mental health and addiction space with other adoptees. So it's not just some sort of perceived experience. There's also some professional experience behind what I'm sharing with you as well. And so dismissing aspects of your child's upbringing because you don't understand, it's only further compounding the traumas that they're coming with. In this day and age, there's so much knowledge out there. There's so much ability to have these resources which weren't available when I was growing up. I was adopted in the mid 80s. I didn't know other adopted people growing up. As a facet of getting sober, it was about after my first year of recovery, I connected with another adoptee in sobriety, and we decided to start a support group for adoptees in recovery. And he had mentioned he had tried doing it before, but it was just really hard trying to keep and maintain a meeting all by yourself. So 2 people, if you want to do this, I highly recommend 2 people, and make sure it takes a lot of consistent effort that you have to do. It's become this really special space. COVID happened shortly after we started the meeting in Los Angeles. So we took it to Zoom and it became international. It's in a space exclusively for adoptees and former foster youth in any kind of recovery to talk about the issues. We felt in traditional addiction recovery spaces only wasn't a space to talk about the trauma. The adoption constellation has an array of trauma in it. Our group actually has attracted a lot of trauma-informed people because people, no matter with how much recovery, even 20 plus years, were finding that they were still facing these issues from their adoption, whether they stayed in the fog until they were later in the recovery, or whether they had tried so many different modalities of therapy and none of them seemed to work. So we're able to share resources as well as our shared experiences for support. What I've watched over the years, now it's been 6 years, is that I've watched and experienced my own growth as well as the other members in it. And it's just beautiful to see. It's something, if you ever work in the recovery community, you get to see how much growth people go through when they're getting sober. And in this case, you see how much growth people go through as they're on their healing journey. So I share these things to help illuminate some of the challenges that you might not realize your own child faces as an addict, as an adoptee, or your spouse, your partner, your friend, and to be compassionate, make the space, kind of realize that people are all feeling different things. When I talk to some of the other adoptees in my recovery community, we always laugh about how we're kind of delayed in our development. Cause I mean, for goodness sake, like if you're in an addiction for the majority of your adulthood, I don't know if people realize that when you get sober, they tell you you're at the age of maturity you were when you first started drinking. So for many of us, that's very early teens. There's a lot of catching up to do there. And then for me, I could say professionally, I had a very limited experience in life because I was catering my life around my addiction. Once I got sober, I just soaked everything up like a sponge. I tried different jobs. I've been part of multiple startups. And then that's when I realized, like, you are an artist. You have always been an artist, but you really repressed that part of yourself with the drinking. It took a lot of courage to pursue my career as an artist, and I didn't do it alone. I had the community of people in recovery and musicians in recovery, adoptees in recovery. We're not one-dimensional. The beauty about having to overcome something is that you do get to look at these things that have been afflicting you, and you get to reclaim the reins of your life and gain dignity, healing, and empowering yourself. And a lot of that came through community. Other people helping me and me helping other people. It's never too late to start anything in your life. we're capable of doing whatever we believe we can, but you also, should do some research and really have a strategy and intention in everything you do.